Right, we're going to let people come on in. All right, everybody, we got people coming on in. So if you would, please, in the chat, just let me know that you're in and you can hear us.
Hi, Pete. Hi, Hilda.
All right.
Welcome.
Gang. All right. So let us know as you're coming in. Let us know where you're calling in and dialing in from. Hilda, Pete. Hey, welcome, Pete. Hilda, Dallas. All right. Okay, is everybody logging in? Give it about a minute. Corpus Christi. Okay, welcome. Okay, thank you so much for joining us. And please feel free as people come on in, just welcome. Let's get started today. Again, thank you so much to you all for joining us today. My special guest, I'm very excited to welcome Dr. Stevie Dawn Carter. And we are excited because we're going to be talking about a great topic today. A lot of you who have been following Better Job Fit, who really started the HR Disruptor Summit last year, know that we are really on the leading edge of bringing people that are on the front lines of what's going on with world work today. And that's why we've found Dr. Stevie to join us. And we're going to be talking about the great topic of working from home and living at work. What I love about meeting Dr. Stevie was, besides the fact that she's a motivational speaker and coach, she is a 4-time business owner. So that's what I love, an entrepreneur at heart. Also founder of Stevie Dawn Inspires, host of the Crazy Bold Joy podcast, and a PhD in leadership, studied emotional intelligence. I love this. Addicted to sharks, coffee, and red wine. Thank you so much for the red wine. And she lives with her husband and family in Mansfield, Texas. Dr. Stevie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you, Jan, so much for having me. Just so excited to have this conversation. It's so needed, right? This conversation is one that we have to be having right now. So I'm so glad that you did this.
Absolutely. And if you would share a little bit about what's going on in your bubble and what projects you've been working on lately.
Yeah, absolutely. So like anyone can imagine, as a speaker and coach, 2020 was a little different. Not as much travel, not as many live events, but that seems to be picking up. So I have traveled a ton since June, and I think that travel is going to continue. So I'm really enjoying that because I love to travel. I love to meet people from all over the country, all over the world. And so it allows me to do that. So that's been really fun. Right now, I think the major focus that most people are talking about and asking about is what's next, right? So we've gone through so much change. We've gone through so much transition in the last couple of years. And I think a lot of people are now asking, what's next? What does 2022 look like? We weren't sure about 2020, 2021, but now we're in it. What does 2022 look like? So I'm doing a lot of work around that. I'm trying to read and research and connect with people around that idea of how leadership is going to look like next year. And then also just doing a lot of work on resilience, right? Because this is a time when we have to be resilient. So that has definitely been my most requested topic of this year and last year. And I think will continue to be important.
Well, I think, resilience, when we talk about just plain and simple, pull up your big girl and boy panties, and we've got to really put the the straps on and start creating our next differently, right? And really dig deep and know that we are strong within ourselves. Different doesn't mean we're weak. It just means different, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, understanding that there is no normal, it is just where we're
No,
at.
there
There's
never
present.
was any normal, right? There really
Yes,
wasn't any normal. That's what
it
I
really
love
wasn't.
about 2020. It just
Yes.
debunked that whole concept.
Yeah, absolutely. And really allowed us to focus, I think. I was talking on a podcast this morning, and, she was saying that 2020 allowed her to start her podcast. She would have never done it if she hadn't had the extra time at home and the extra kind of focus on herself. And I think that's exactly it, right? Sometimes we need these change ups to help us focus on ourselves and focus on what's really important. And we're seeing a lot of that. And I think that's only going to turn into wonderful things.
Well, look what it did from the 2008 Great Recession, right? I mean, that was the start of the gig economy. I mean, this really opens up innovation. It shakes up as a psychological disruptor. I know that when we talk about work, I mean, we talk about outdated work boundaries. That shook us up, already, right? We didn't ask for it. It was given to us. And that's what I think really excited us when we started to speak about certain topics, that this really was what people are experiencing and how it really provided fruit for people to find that innovation, to work outside their comfort zone, to work through fear, unknown, right? Tap into that resilience and that faith. I just love when we talked about the topic, working from home or living at work, because that is there's just no boundaries, right? No boundaries.
There are, it's so funny that title came to me over a year ago now, but because I just felt like I had always worked from home. So I was used to, well, at least since I started my business, I was used to the boundaries and the settings and all of that, right? And I think people who work from home and have for years, all great. But then all of a sudden, everyone was working from home. And I called somebody and we were just talking about, I was just checking in on her. How are you? How are you doing? How are things, family, all the stuff. And one of the things she kept talking about is she's working so many more hours. Now, I knew what she did as a job. And so I'm like, okay, but is your job, like, is your boss requiring more hours? And she stopped for a second and she goes, well, no. Well, so why are you working more hours? And she goes, well, it just never turns off. And I stopped and I said, no, you're not turning it off.
I love what you just said, right? We choose.
You're not turning it off. We
got to be the driver of the train, right?
We do. We have to own our ocean. It is our life, man. And so that moment with her really stuck with me. And I started asking my other clients and my other friends, and like, what are you doing? And so many people kept saying, I just feel like I live at work now because it's on my kitchen table. It's never turned off. The lights are constantly flashing. And I'm like, oh, wow, we need to build in some new boundaries. This is an area that people haven't experienced. And so they weren't sure how to set up boundaries for it. Now that we're experiencing it, we've got to set up these boundaries because otherwise they never get away.
I mean, we're not really, what's really interesting, when you and I were speaking about creating space for ourselves, time to unplug and everything. I mean, it starts with this. Right? I mean, people think it's work. Like,
oh no, it starts here.
Unplug, people.
Yeah. I was doing a coaching session earlier today, and we were talking about vision, right? What do you envision for your life? And then we started talking about what takes you away from that, right? What makes you get distracted, not achieve your goals? And one of the things I said was, is this in your vision? When you look at your life, do you picture yourself holding your phone? Is that how you see it? Because if not, then why do you spend so much time on it? It's not getting you to your vision. It's not getting you to your goals. But you're so right. It starts there. It doesn't even start here on the computer. It starts here. I mean, we never turn it off. We never disconnect. And so therefore, we have no boundary between work and home, between life and make believe. It's all open.
You know, and that's where, again, does the tail wag the dog? I always like to, when we're doing our creating your next workshops, we always say, okay, do you feel the tail's wagging your dog, wagging the dog? Like, do you not feel control of your life? You're running on a program belief, right? A belief is just a thought you keep on thinking. That's really what it is.
Right? It is absolutely.
Simple as that. It sounds so ridiculous because it is. It's just a belief is just a thought that you keep on or continue to think. Think differently, right?
Yes. And that's it. And so much of this forced us to do that, right? Forced us to think differently. And so one of the things that I know we talked about it when we talked prior to this, but I think it's so important to talk about is commute time, right? Let's actually shift a belief on something. Let's talk about commute time, right? So those of you that are with us, if you want to put in the comments what your standard commute was to and from work before, I would love to see that. But here's the thing. I live in Mansfield, Texas. We're a little south of Fort Worth, Arlington, that area. So it's 30 minutes to Fort Worth. It's an hour to North Dallas. That's where we're at.
Pack a lunch.
Pack a lunch, right? You're not going to go home. So at this point, right, when I was working in my corporate job, I would get up in the morning, I would get ready. There was a get ready time blocked off at home, right? Your shower, your dressing, whatever. Then I would get in the car and I would drive for a half an hour. Now, during that half an hour, what would happen is I would make that mental separation between home and work, because you're driving to work. It's when you start thinking about your to-do list, you start thinking about the emails, you start playing your day in your head. It's all this stuff, but it's a mental shift that you've crossed that boundary. So when you arrive at work, you're like, hey, I'm here. And then guess what? You got to do the same thing on the way home. One of the biggest changes we saw in 2020 was people didn't account for commute time when they started working from home. They just started getting ready and opening up that laptop, which means you're getting to work earlier than you normally would have, and you're probably staying later than you normally would have. And the thing about it is, it's not just about the hours that you're working, it's the fact that that commute time is vital to your mental health. That commute time is where you make those separations, where you let go of the anger at your boss so that you can be at home with your children. It's where you make the decision to say, today wasn't a great day at work, but I still get to have the evening with my family. Or it's getting up in the morning and feeling like, oh, the kids are crazy today. Oh my gosh, they're driving me nuts. But now I'm going to work and I'm letting that go. They will be okay.
That
right?
Natural transition, right?
Yes.
That natural transition. You know, we, on the flip side of that though, for when you talk about stress in traffic, et cetera, it depends on how you're perceiving that transition, right? If you, you know, what mental state you're in, no matter what you're doing. But you're exactly right. When I know myself, I mean, when I started working for myself since 2008, you know, you get up, you know, put on some jeans or whatever and coffee at 7:30. You don't have to go anywhere. You're right in front of that computer. I always like, I know when you and I were speaking about this originally, we love that time that you're in a semi-meditative state when you're in the car and you get downloads of free thinking, right? Things that are on your mind. But innovation happens in that space, right? When you're in the right side of your brain. But when you are jumping from bed to the computer, you're missing that opportunity for free thinking and innovation and creativity, right?
Yeah. And you're also just missing that time to process human emotion, right? So it's not just the analytical side, it's also the emotional side of it. To say, you know, emotions take time to process and we need to give them time and space to do so. But if we jump from one thing to the other, I know you and I were talking about just before we hit the record button. Well, right now everybody is scheduled, well, I have a meeting until 2 o'clock, but then I'm supposed to be at a meeting at 2 o'clock. Somehow in that 1 minute of time, I'm supposed to make all these shifts, right? Which doesn't happen. But just think about your emotions. You take the emotions from your 1 o'clock meeting into your 2 o'clock space, because there's no space to process. Well, that's what commute time gave us. It gave us time to process in between things. We got to let go of those emotions. But I think it's even worse now because now that we can Zoom everything, people are putting more and more meetings in a tighter space. Oh, it's great. We can do a half-hour meeting back to back. We get 2 meetings in one time slot. Yay. But what emotional damage are
Yeah.
you doing there? Not to
And there's no
yourself, but to
segment of
everybody else.
intention, right? And there's no
No.
segment of intention of transition from one meeting to the next. Again, that
Right.
pause of what's your intention going into your next meeting, right? Being
Right.
aware and transitioning, honoring that space before you go into that meeting, right? That
Well,
being consciously aware or consciousness, right?
yes. And to your point, intentional, right? So that you
Yeah.
can set an intention and be intentional. Like one of the things I used to tell leaders in our classes was don't let your 8:30 meeting come out your 9 o'clock mouth. And the point is the
Nice.
9:30 people aren't the ones who caused that. That was your 8:30 group. If you want to be
Right.
mad at them, okay, we can have a different conversation on whether you should actually verbally be mad at them or not. But don't let your 8:30 meeting and feelings come out your 9:30 mouth. It's not fair. Right. But to your point, set intention. And where
Yeah.
do you set that intention when you're running so fast you can't keep up? There's a natural cycle to it, and we need to embrace that and support that in our boundaries. And so we need to make sure that, yes, we are working from home, but that does not mean we are living at work. We
And that,
have to
but it
have that space.
absolutely, and it still comes back to you are the driver of that train. Nobody else is telling you to pick this up. Nobody else is telling you to sit down when you got your coffee. And, you have to create the discipline to do
Yes.
that.
Well, and not only
You
discipline,
can't,
but the
you
habit.
can't, right? You can't pass that buck on to
No,
anybody else.
no, it's nobody else's fault. It's only yours. And it's a habit.
Yes.
So it's whatever you're doing every day, you're going to continue to do it every day. You have to change that habit. And that comes with discipline and intention and just being thoughtful of what you're doing for yourself and for others.
I mean, own it. I mean, it's your life, your emotion, your feelings, your mental clarity. Why not? It's scary. Okay. Trust me. True. It's scary when you start to take ownership and decide that you don't want to feel that way, right? You don't want to feel harried, hurried, and hassled. You don't want to feel stressed. It's a choice, right? I want to ask you, before the study findings, I want you to share with me some facts. I got to hear some numbers.
Well, okay, so a couple of things that I think play into this conversation. Number one, right? Most of us, if we take a given work day as being 8 to 5, let's just say it's 8 to 5, okay? Then in that work day, the actual hours you're working are 10 to 2 with a lunch break. You don't actually work 100% from 8 to 10, and you don't actually work 100% from 2 to 3 or 5 to 5. And the statistics show us that most people only are effective in their work 50% of the time. And most of that is because all of our life keeps compounding together. It's distractedness because of all the connectedness. I no longer really separate work from home when my kids text me every 5 minutes, right? Not that you shouldn't want your kids to text you, because you should. But the point is, it's not, there's no separation there. So in a meeting, you continuously are parsing out your brain to different pieces that are trying to handle it all at one time. And that's going to make it so that you're actually not being effective. So 50% of people, 50% of the workday, people aren't working on work. Their brains are tied up in other things, which to me makes the intention setting piece ever the much more important, right? And
exactly, because then you can get back into that engaged state of mind, right? When if you were, I know that we teach a great little share is before you transition to your next activity, whether it be a phone call, meeting, or whatever, write out what you want to experience, right? Write out what do you want to accomplish but what do you want to experience from this meeting with the people you're meeting with? And it puts a whole new perspective. It makes you have to really think instead of just going through the motions of just doing, jumping through hoops and just showing up at work and just going through the motions of work, to really be engaged in your work and what you're doing, your actions at work, right? The people that you're co-creating with. I loved when I love when you spoke about, we talked about the human first approach. I know we're going to come back to that natural recovery cycle after this, but if you would speak upon that human first approach.
Yeah, so the idea for human first is just really always understanding that the whole human is involved in any conversation that you have. While we can want to put aside work when we're at home and we can want to put aside home when we're at work, there is the whole human involved. And so it's looking at that when we interact with each other, understanding that some of the responses, some of the emotions, some of the feelings, some of the communication may not actually be directed at us, but maybe because of something else going on in that person's life. And I always think of that picture that shows up on the internet every so often. It has like this bar chart, this line graph, and it says, here's how long a person's life is. And then it has this little sliver and it says, here's how much you know about it. And I think that truly is it, right? Yeah. Especially in a work capacity. I know we're talking to people all the time who are like, well, we have the oversharers at work, right? The people who share everything about their lives that some people would prefer they not share. Then we have the people who share nothing about their lives. And then people are really like, why aren't you being friendly? There's all of this right now of bringing everything together. And I think in some ways it's beautiful. In some ways, the idea that everything's kind of coming together is great because it means you're a whole and you're a human and you're allowed to have all of your emotions and all of your life goals and everything brought to the surface. And I think that's wonderful. In some ways, I think it's making communication incredibly difficult. Because when we are bringing our whole human self to work, and when others are trying to accept that human first approach of understanding that you're bringing your whole self, then sometimes it means we're probably not going to understand each other. I got to ask a lot more clarifying questions because I can't make assumptions that everything is about this particular subject. Because as we've just been talking about, if you don't set intentions right, you may not be thinking at all about the subject we're currently talking about. So I have to use that. And so the human first approach for me is making sure that when I show up, I bring my whole human self, that I expect and accept, both words, expect and accept, other people to bring their whole human to the workplace, but also that means I'm going to have to ask clarifying questions and I'm going to have to give grace, because those are things that are going to have to be involved if we're going to grow as a team, as a society, as a group. If we're going to grow, we're going to have to ask clarifying questions to truly understand where people are at. We're also going to have to give grace for when people are having a rough day and it comes out sometimes. And those are two concepts that I really think people need to get behind to really put this human first approach to work.
Well, and that sharing on that grace and acceptance, of self and others, I'm seeing interesting because we see a lot of shame and blame thrown around. And what's interesting, and judgment. And when what's interesting is you see a lot of judging going on, and then you see the contrast of, well, we want everybody to be accepted. Well, you can't have that extreme.
Can't have both.
You can't have, that's like you can't have fear and faith in the same bottle. Okay, so we're watching the 3D, right? We're seeing this all in the media, TV, everywhere, about judging, etc., shame and blame, and then fighting for individuality and acceptance of all. Well, those two go against one another. So it comes down to, as it always does, how do we practice our own level of acceptance of others and grace of others, for ourselves and others, right? Lose the judgment, lose the shame and blame. That's what I think really, when we talk about that when you brought up originally the human first approach and everything all bundled up in one package, to really do that self-assessment of, okay, really what do I want to share? What is necessary? And, I got to get my stuff together, I got if I'm angry, or if I'm, having unrealistic expectations, or if I'm throwing shame or blame or judgment, that's a call to check on the self, like what's causing that within yourself, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another piece of that is when you say, grace and acceptance. One of the things that we have to do is always use ourselves as a temperature check, right? So what I try and look at is if I were them, right? Because we do an us and them thinking, right? If I were them and I was in their shoes, what kind of grace and patience would I want somebody to give me? When you put that on you, like, what if that were me? It was me saying it. It was me who put my foot in my mouth. What kind of grace and patience would I want that person to give me? When you start thinking like that, that's empathy. Then you're able to go, okay, that's the grace and empathy I'm going to show to somebody else. But you're so right. When everything is external, that is a red flag for yourself that you need to go internal, because it's coming from somewhere.
Yes.
And we need to clear this out and figure this out in order to make everything better, right? There's a quote out there that says, don't let your external circumstances dictate your internal feelings. But I think the opposite is also true, right? If you're doing things externally that aren't adding up, that's a check yourself then, right? Come into yourself. And there's a strategy we use all the time called a pulse check. Really easy. Scale of 1 to 10. Jan, I'll just ask you today. We'll just do it. We'll be authentic in this. If you had to give yourself a number between 1 and 10, 10 being you are feeling awesome today, it's a great day. 1 being, you know what, tomorrow's Friday, I'd really just rather fast forward, get to Friday. Somewhere between 1 and 10. How are you feeling today?
An 8. Abundance of
8. I love it. That's awesome. I'm feeling about
it's still a choice. It's still a choice.
It is still a choice. It is still a choice, but we need to be honest that everybody has bad days.
No,
right?
Agreed.
So I myself, while I am very positive and being here with you is great, I'm feeling about a 6 today. I got some knee issues. I got a little pain. There's some things going on, bringing my number a little bit down. And we've all had a 2 kind of day. I think what that does, that pulse check, is that allows you to put a number to it and say, okay, here's where I am. And I have 3 different rules. Number 1, right? How do I make sure that I don't let, if my number is less than 5, how do I make sure I don't let that impact the people around me? Right? If I'm having a bad day, how do I keep that to myself? Not bottle it up, but do I need to talk to somebody? Do I need to vent it out? Do I need to, so that it doesn't come out at somebody that doesn't need it? That's one rule. Second rule, how do me, myself, and how can I raise it just 1 point? How do I raise it just 1 point? If you're an 8, Jan, I want you to think about what would you make you a 9? Right? I'm a 6. What would make me a 7?
Right? Mood lifter, either flip on the phone to see some pictures, go outside, get away from the desk, right?
There you go.
Mood shifters, right?
That's it. So that's changing it by 1 point. And then my third rule on it is leaders. A leader is never responsible for making somebody's day a 10. A leader's job is to make sure it's as good a day as it can get.
Yeah.
And that may be a 6. And that may be a 4, and that's okay.
Right.
As a leader, that's your job. Just show up, accept them where they are, and try and make it as good a day as it can be.
Because it is what it is. It comes down to it is what it is, and there's nothing wrong.
And there's nothing wrong, and it's their ownership of it, right? So as a leader, if you're having a 2 kind of day, I don't own that. You do. But I can't also beg you to be a 10. Like, I just need to accept that you're at a 2. How do I make it the best day for us possible in that space, right? But to your point, it is a choice. And a lot of times just doing a pulse check on yourself first thing in the morning can reset your mood. Because if you check in with yourself and your gut instinct, I'm feeling about a 5. Okay, then what can you do to change that?
That's it.
What are
Asking
some
yourself,
options you
right?
have? Asking yourself that question,
Right.
and shifting that will allow you to kind of bring that whole human self to work and feel good about it, because you did the pulse check, you know where you're at. And I think we've got to get better at that reflective practice.
I think, as we wind this down, so what would be your top three? I can tell you, I do want to do a 3A, right? So it would be to put this down, right? I mean, the top three proactive things that people can do to start creating those mindful transitions and separations or healthy boundaries. Lose this. Right?
I think the phone is one. I think making sure that you do commute time, building commute time, whatever that looks like. It doesn't need to be an hour. Maybe it needs to be 10, 15 minutes. Build in that time in your schedule between work and home, whether you're driving it or not, just to have that intentionality between creating the buffer, because I think that's really important. The other thing I would tell people to do is do that pulse check and try really hard to make sure your 8:30 doesn't come out at 9:30. Do that pulse check and be, to your point, Jan, intentional with what you want to accomplish out of each meeting, each interaction, so that you are very conscious of what you're bringing to the table and how to show up as your best self. Because I think that's really the key.
I love it. My friend, please put in the chat your information if you would.
I will.
So everybody can contact you and reach out on LinkedIn. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to drop that into the chat. We can take any questions here toward the end. Anybody? See some. Anybody want to ask some questions? Come on, I know, Pete, you always have some great questions. I won't put him on this. I won't put him on the spot. Everybody, thank you so much for your time today. And I hope this has been valuable and to bring added value to your day and to your work-life balance. And thank you so much, Dr. Stevie, for joining us today, and look forward to seeing you again soon.
I would love that, Jan. Thank you all so much for listening, and make sure to do a little bit of intentionality and a little bit of joy before your next meeting.
Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.